disturbing rise in human rights violations, drawing regional and global concern. In Kenya, digital activist Rose Njeri was arrested under the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act after creating a tool for citizens to oppose the Finance Bill 2025. Her arrest on the 30th of May sparked public outrage and calls for her release. Meanwhile, in Tanzania, Kenyan activist Boniface Mwangi and Ugandan lawyer Agather Atuhaire reported being detained, tortured and sexually assaulted by security officers whilst attending a court case for opposition leader in Tanzania, Tundu Lissu. They were later abandoned near their respective borders, highlighting growing fears over cross-border repression and threats to human rights defenders. Well, to unpack these human rights violations, particularly against activists, I'm now joined by Wanjeri Nderu, who's the president of the International Society for Human Rights in charge of East Africa. And we also have on the line Neto Agostino, co-leader of the United Green Movement Party and also a member of the President Maraga 2027 team. To both of you, thank you so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. And a very good morning.
Great. Let me start with you, perhaps, Wanjeri. And this is a question for both of you. Just your overall impressions and take on what we've seen in recent weeks. Is that an indicator of the general situation in the region for some time now?
Yes, indeed it is. Sorry. And it's actually worse than is being reported, really, because we are seeing a cross-border collaboration between Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania in suppressing, freedom of speech. We are seeing abductions and, even murders in some parts, especially in Kenya. We are having a lot of people who have been disappeared turning up dead. And what has happened is, if you notice, there have been claims or allegations, and I can say it is not an allegation because I was in the street last year during the protests, and some of the officers in the street were definitely not Kenyans, because we can tell from the accent that they are from across, in Uganda. And some of those people were in uniform, fighting or trying to get us off the street. And now we are seeing what is happening in Tanzania, where just a few months back there was even collaboration between Tanzania and Kenyan police to abduct Maria Sarungi, who is an activist in exile here in Kenya. And she was disappeared for a few hours until we had to, create a ruckus, especially online, for her to be released. So yes, indeed, we are experiencing a very dangerous decline in our democracy as a country, and also as a region. We are seeing the three presidents tending to come together to make sure that, they silence their citizens.
Neto, you're finding the same, and is this escalating over time? Is it related to elections or just a general feeling that activists need to be silenced?
I think the presidents of East Africa are losing it. They're completely losing it. The East African community is catching a flu of dictatorship. We are watching the derogability of human rights, contrary to, instruments like the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. The East African presidents have turned the region into a space where civic and political rights are supposed to be pies in the sky. They're thinking that it's privileges to the people, which goes counter to all those instruments that the countries have signed. Like Wanjeri said, looks like there's a bit of collaboration, because when we had the street protests in June 2024, I think, and it is true, some soldiers crossed borders. The people crossed borders and came and caused mayhem in Kenya, shot, killed, maimed people. Now, we watched. I was in Tanzania with my presidential candidate for 2027, the Honorable Chief Justice David Maraga. We were together to show solidarity with Tundu Lissu. And why were we showing solidarity? the Chama cha Mapinduzi in Tanzania is gone against its own code of conduct. They have an electoral code of conduct where they are actually saying that all political parties are going to have a free fair play. Free fair play is what is required in a democracy. Yet Tundu Lissu and his Chadema party are being stranglehold. They're not being given the space to participate, to talk. We've seen that happen in Uganda, what President Museveni is trying to do to the NUP party of Bobby Wine and Tim, that, they're not allowed to even have gatherings. The by-elections, like we watched the recent ones in Uganda, where there was chaos perpetrated by government police. In Kenya, for example, we've also seen the same repression. Some political party events are being broken into. Several political party leaders have been hounded out of office. This goes counter to those very instruments, the international civic and political rights that Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania are party to. It goes counter to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights that Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania are party to. It also goes counter to the East African community aspirations. So if we are going to be a community of persons, it does not make sense why Boniface Mwangi or Agather Atuhaire, for example, would be arrested, detained, tortured in the way they were, especially if they're East African citizens. The sense of the community is that we're supposed to be one. We're supposed to be one family. The only reason why we have the boundaries, the only reason why there's Uganda and Tanzania is because of some colonialists. So to the extent that we've agreed to come to the community of East Africa, we should be having free movement of persons, free movement of goods, free movement of skills. And repression in Tanzania, as it is happening for Tundu Lissu, is repression in Kenya, is repression in Uganda. And the reason why, like I said, the Chief Justice David Maraga went to Tanzania to show solidarity is because if we leave Tanzanians on their own, like we think the Tundu Lissu election is nothing to do with Kenya, like I've said, Kenya will catch a flu, and even President Maraga's bid for 2027 would then not make sense because that repression, having been played in Tanzania, will play again in Kenya, will play in Uganda. And that is why all East Africans must stand together in solidarity. So wherever there's violation in any part of East Africa, all of us who believe in human rights, all of us who believe in the rule of law, all of us who believe in constitutionalism must show up and must be there for the people of East Africa.
Wanjeri, it sounds as if there's more than just catching a flu from one country to the next. Some of the stories suggest agents from one country are allowed to get into another country to target people of interest for them.
Yes, that is indeed true. We saw this with Kizza Besigye. He was abducted in Kenya, and there is no way you can abduct somebody as high profile as Kizza Besigye if you do not have collaboration with the Kenyan police system. And he's not the only one. We have had issues with some Turkish guys and people who have come to Kenya to quote unquote, hide or even just to do their normal official business. Like Kizza Besigye was here for the launching of a book by one of our politicians, and he was abducted. And since then, he's been detained and is undergoing an illegal court-martial process. I mean, he's a civilian. What is he doing in a military court? But this wouldn't happen if Kenya is not aiding and abetting this behavior. And what is even worrying is they use, especially if you look at the whole Boniface, Mwangi, and Agatha story, we are finding they have openly declared that they were sexually abused. This is happening in Kenya too. We have an activist who was abducted and he was sexually abused, a male, by males on video, and they shared the video in order to silence him so that he stopped speaking about the corruption in Mombasa County. And when we see such tactics being used, it takes us back, especially Kenyans. We have had such, we tend to think of ourselves as having some sense of freedom in expressing ourselves. And it has been there, especially after Moi left Kenya. But now we are not having any freedom after we speak. We are getting threats. Personally, I have received even phone calls and messages telling me to shut up or I'll be, and it's happening to anybody who is being seen to be vocal. And where we are headed, as my colleague Neto says, is very scary, very scary. And I don't think we are headed there. We are already there. And what is interesting, it has to be noted that our President Ruto just last week apologized to the people and said, I am sorry to the young people. I am sorry for everything that is happening. And then the same week, we have the arrest of Njeri for coming up with a tool that is meant to help us do what we call public participation for the finance bill that is about to be tabled, and also the abduction of two men from a region called Elgeyo Marakwet. One in his 40s, one in his 20s, who were later found murdered in a mortuary in a different county this weekend. So it's still going on, even with the admittance by the president himself. I remember when he was campaigning to become president, he said one of the things he's not going to allow is abductions and enforced disappearances, illegal detentions. He said he's going to stop that. And this is on the background that just before they came into power, several bodies were being unearthed in a river called River Yala, that the former regime, that's how the former regime was dealing with whoever they termed as a criminal or whoever they felt did not deserve to live. They felt the need to kill them and dump them in this River Yala. And that was a big part of his electoral promises, that he's not going to do that. But immediately he comes into power, and Kenyans start disappearing literally a year after they've been sworn in. And now we have hundreds. Literally, the numbers cannot even be accounted for because the government itself is not acknowledging officially, other than the off-the-cuff apologies from the president. We do not have an acknowledgement from instruments of power that are supposed to be, handling such things, saying this number of people is missing, or these investigations are happening, or in fact, there's I think only one police officer who is in court currently over the killings of last year, and that's because he's on video shooting at the crowd. But majority of the people who we have, over 100 recorded by human rights organizations that have been murdered, we have tens missing. So we really don't even have numbers. All we hear is that mortuaries are full. We can, like there's a time it was in the news several weeks last year that the main mortuary in Nairobi was full of bodies that were not, on record as having been brought by relatives. So we are having a big problem. And when we see that, even before, I remember when we started our activism, some of us, if things would get very hot in Kenya, we would move to Tanzania to just cool things down. That's not possible now. If they're coming for even the ones who are here hiding, and Kenya was supposed to be a safe space for some of these people, they're picking them up like what happened to Maria. Then the whole of East Africa is chaotic at the moment. And this collaboration is very, very scary.
Neto, I'm just trying to find a common thread, because often that gives us an idea of motivation. Is it that most of these incidents are happening to people who've criticized the authorities of the day or opposing something that the authorities may be pushing?
I think, and we believe, as members of the United Government Party and also the President Mulaga 2027 campaign, we think that Africa, or the East African region, is at a critical juncture. It's a sort of thing that we experienced when we were fighting colonialism. East Africa needs to break from its dictatorial past. East Africa needs a reset. We need to get back East Africa to where the founding fathers are. When President Nyerere and his colleagues Jomo Kenyatta and the Ugandan counterparts fought for independence, they fought for independence to get Africans out of poverty, to get Africans out of slavery, and to get Africans into a free space where you could live in dignity and pursue your fundamental freedoms. The leaders who took up power have since gotten into regression. You see that we are watching rights, dirigible rights, rights that are supposed to be non-dirigible, acts of torture, inhuman, degrading treatment. When a lady comes on TV and said she was forced to strip naked, insertions made on their private parts, that's inhuman. That's inhuman, degrading treatment. Who does that to a fellow human being? For whatever it is worth, for whatever you want to fight for, why would you get someone naked and also have intrusions on their parts? The other thing that we've watched, which I think Wanjeri has spoken to, went counter to that very fundamental core of the refugee law, the principle of non-refoulement. We have seen in the country of Kenya, which for the longest has been a humanitarian hub, that Kizza Besigye, who is not a normal East African in itself, he's been a presidential candidate and is of international standing, that he can just be picked up in the streets of Nairobi like a piece of chicken then sent back to the authorities in Uganda? What then is a principle of what is that principle of the International Covenant for Refugee Protection? What is a principle? What is a place for the principle of non-refoulement? That even if Kizza Besigye was running away from Uganda, you can't forcibly bundle them into a vehicle and send him back. The case of Turkish refugees. So Kenya, East Africa, and Uganda have gone counter to fundamental principles of human rights, which I really think that we cannot let them go. So it is not a question that the East African activists have made any mistakes. No, it is a critical juncture. It is East Africa is fighting. It's fighting with itself to give birth to something that is better, and I think that's why we must keep pushing. East Africa must give something birth to something better in terms of we must ensure that these things about the fundamental freedoms that we have in our constitution, the fundamental freedoms that we have in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, those things cannot just be pies in the sky. And it's a good space to be. By the way, it's a good space to be because the activist Rose Njeri, when she was in court yesterday, having spent the whole weekend in the police detention for innovation. Kenya is supposed to be priding itself for supporting youth innovation. Here we are, someone who's creative, has innovated, should be given patents, should be given trademarks for innovation, is incarcerated for thinking. So Kenya is even stifling us from thinking. We're not supposed to think. You're supposed to just be there, and the leaders are supposed to tell you what to do. They say jump, jump. We can't allow it. So it's a good place to be. I think it's a pains of birth. It's a pains of birth of a new East African community. It's a pains of birth of a new Africa. And I really think that it's a good place to be. And it's good that God has given us grace to be alive, to see that we can also participate in the birthing. And that is why, for us, we shall constantly move. And I really think that where we move forward, the East African community citizens must be sure that they are awoke to who they elect into office. And, it's happening in a very good time. The East African community elections are happening like almost, in a sequence of sorts. Tanzania happens this year, Uganda, and then Kenya. We must ensure that the people we put in office are people who believe in constitutionalism, rule of law, people who believe in fundamental human rights principles, who can then take Africa forward to what our founding fathers of the nations did. And that's, I think, it's a good space to be. And that's why all of us across the East African region and across the African region must show solidarity in a way that Pan-Africanists have never seen before.
Well, Jerry, especially when I think about Rose Njeri's story, is it the digital space under attack as well? I mean, I was in Tanzania last week, and I keep saying this. I was shocked to find that Twitter had been blocked. And these are vehicles for people to be able to express themselves in a way they couldn't before. It looks as if freedom of expression is under huge threat.
Indeed it is. And in the Tanzanian situation, they blamed Kenya for the chaos that they had online. They had never seen what they experienced after the abductions and the detentions of the people who had gone to support Tundu Lissu. So what happens is Kenya has a very vibrant young generation, and not just young, even us who are our Gen Xs, we are very focused on using social media for advocacy. And it has now become even more, impactful because of the last year's finance bill. All the protests and things like that were being planned online. And this has really shaken the establishment because they have lost their war on information. They had the monopoly before because they had paid bloggers and they had all these narratives they'd push out, even using our mainstream media. Now they can't. It is impossible. Kenyans own the space now. And though Tanzania got a bit shocked and they had to shut down because it was too much for them, in Kenya, it's the norm. And we have this thing called Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act, I think Netu might correct me, number 5 of 2018, where they're using that, and that's what they used to arrest Njeri. And everybody who is using their online spaces to do any advocacy or to go against what is being done, that anti-corruption campaigns, is being taken to court under this bill. We have tried to fight this bill. In fact, there are people who've been taken, like one of our very big activists, online activists called Cyprian. Every time he's taken to court under this bill, they lose and the court dismisses the case because really it is not, the bill itself is faulty. It's being used to silence people who have a huge following online. I'd like to read you something that Njeri did, and what Njeri did was phenomenal. The president has been very keen in saying, oh, I need to support the young people in their innovation, and the government is ready to give them any support they need. But when these young people or whoever else decides to use the same systems that the government is supposed to be supporting, they are arrested for using their head. They're arrested for new ideas that the government does not know how to deal with. Even with all their bloggers and all the money they spend every month, and I'm telling you, it is a lot of money. They have people on a payroll who just sit online and troll or blog or whatever for the government, and it's not working. So yesterday, after she was released, she released a statement, and one paragraph of it really caught me, because what they did is they sent 3 Subarus, the Subaru vehicles. Those are the ones that they use when they want to abduct and arrest us. So our Directorate of Criminal Investigation uses Subaru cars. And they sent 15 men to her, 15. She's a tiny little young woman, and you're sending 15 grown men and 3 vehicles to arrest her. But this is what she said. If they send 3 Subarus and 15 men to arrest little old me because of an idea I executed, then they surely know the power of ideas. They may line their pockets with taxpayer money, grab all public land, steal from our pensioners, defund and desecrate education, show disrespect to professionals, and still they remain afraid of ideas. So we should not be afraid to think. That's a very powerful statement coming from somebody who has just spent 3 days. And by the way in Kenya it works, once you're arrested, like on a Friday, you have to stay in, you can't be bailed or anything until you're presented to court on Monday. They intentionally took her over before the weekend, knowing very well on Monday was a holiday. So she could still not have been presented into court. For what? For coming up with an idea for us to exercise our right, constitutional right, to react and participate. We have something in our constitution called public participation. They cannot pass anything until the public says it is okay. And that was a tool that would have allowed many more people to engage in this process of the Finance Bill 2025. So what they have now done is they have made it impossible for this bill to pass as is, because they brought more scrutiny to it. Even the things they would have wanted to hide, now Kenyans are looking at this bill and wondering, what are they hiding? Why would they go to the extent of arresting Njeri, who is just giving us a tool to engage with the process? So our online space is very vibrant, and they have lost the information war, and it's beautiful to see. I'm telling you, from an activist position, I am enjoying the scenes of what is happening online. And unless they shut down, they're not winning this war. That's for sure. They're not.
I wish we could speak for so much longer. It is just one of those issues I think we need to keep in public view. But to both of you, thank you so much indeed for joining us on the program and giving us a sense of the challenges that citizens are facing, particularly human rights activists. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. And thank
you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Njeri Nderu, President of the International Society for Human Rights in charge of East Africa, and also Neto Augustino, who's a co-leader of the United Green Movement Party and also a member of presidential candidate Maraga's 2027 team. It's 8:30. It's time